Okay, I think we can get started, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Candace Beakey, president and publisher of Albuquerque Business First, which is a digital and print business publication. You can find us online at albuquerquebusinessfirst.com. I'm honored to be moderating today's discussion on New Mexico's renewable energy future. The conversation about New Mexico's renewable energy future has heightened during the COVID pandemic, especially as it concerns our dependence on oil and gas to fuel our state budget. This panel has been convened in partnership by the New Mexico State Land Office and Powering New Mexico, an alliance of New Mexicans who believe we must harness our state's renewable energy resources, support growth in wind capacity, and advocate for transmission upgrades to deliver that power to market. Our panelists today include U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich, New Mexico Commissioner of Public Lands Stephanie Garcia Richard, Sarah Webster, Vice President of Government Relations for Pattern Energy, Ricky Seguin, Executive Director of Interwest Energy Alliance, Fernando Martinez, Executive Director of the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority, and John Hensley, Vice President of Research and Analytics for the American Wind Energy Association. Thank you, panelists, for being here. I'm sure all of our audience is applauding silently at home. Each panelist will give a brief introduction, then I will moderate a conversation about where we are going and what needs to happen for New Mexico to become a leader in this country's renewable energy future. After that, we'll take questions from the media, and members of the media who are on, you can type your questions into the Q&A box right on the Zoom platform. Before we launch into our introductions, a special thank you to our ASL interpreter from Sorensen Communications. Thank you very much. Let's get started. Senator Heinrich, would you please kick us off with an introduction briefly of yourself and your involvement with renewables?
Thank you. I grew up in a utility family. My dad was a lineman for the local utility company. So I'd go to his office after school and draw pictures of Ready Kilowatt. And it was just sort of, I was part of that culture growing up with him and his friends. And I didn't realize how much I absorbed around energy over those years until I got to college and was studying engineering. And I joined a group of us that decided we wanted to design and build a solar-powered carbon fiber race car and race against other schools across the United States. And so in 1993, we raced from Dallas to Minneapolis along with a team from Stanford and Virginia Tech and Cal Poly Pomona. And it was at that point that I realized just how far we could take these technologies and that the real challenges were just bringing down the costs. And boy, we've certainly seen that with wind in New Mexico. It's really at a tipping point where it's taking off and providing really important jobs in rural communities in our state.
Thank you very much, Senator. Commissioner Garcia Richard, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy to be here. And before I start my introductions, I do want to just thank the partnership of, Powering New Mexico, the industry specialists we have, the association representatives that we have, and of course, our Renewable Energy Transmission Authority here in New Mexico, which is like a unique entity in the country around really providing the infrastructure and support for build out of transmission and renewable energy projects. So thank you all for coming together for this very important conversation, for making these ideas accessible to New Mexicans and others. And of course, this technology allows folks in DC to join us and other places across the country. So we're very grateful to have this participation. Candace, make sure to ask the good senator whether or not he won that race that he talked about. So he talked about, the race, but he didn't say whether or not he won.
Okay.
So here at the Land Office, renewable energy projects, renewable energy build out is one of our cornerstone efforts. And this recent economic crisis has underscored even greater the need to diversify our revenue stream in New Mexico, to ensure that we have, clean, renewable, sustainable energy sources. And so this is, there's no time like the present for really having this conversation, but also putting the political will behind renewable energy build out in New Mexico. I'm proud to say that we established the first ever Office of Renewable Energy here at the Land Office when I took office in 2019. And that office's sole mission is to single-mindedly pursue build out on state trust land, and talk with developers, highlight state trust land for renewable energy build out. And what folks may not realize, and developers often don't if they're not familiar with New Mexico, is that it's a win-win for us when they build on state trust land, because the revenue generated goes to support New Mexico's public schools, universities, and hospitals through our trust. And so I am proud to say that since 2019, we have signed 4 major deals on renewable energy projects. We've got Gladstone that we're doing with P&E, that's in Torrance County. We've got the Great Divide wind project that's down in my home county of Grant County, that we're doing that with Scout Clean Energy. We've got Avangrid has just signed the La Jolla lease. And then Pattern is our newest member to the State Land Office renewable energy family, and they've just joined us with the Western Spirit project. And so that conglomerate of new projects is going to bring 400 brand new megawatts of energy to New Mexico, and will result over the lifetime of those projects in $80 million being paid out to New Mexico's beneficiaries. So we're talking about some real major development and use of state trust land for that area. And we always like to be in the center of these conversations around renewable energy, and talk about how the Land Office can aid and assist and fill in the gaps for these projects. And so it's my great privilege to be here with you today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And that's a great segue into welcoming Sarah Webster. I had the opportunity to meet Sarah and tour Pattern's headquarters in California just a little over a year ago, I think. So good to see you again, Sarah. Would you take a moment to introduce yourself?
You bet. And I apologize if I nerd out a little bit here with some enthusiasm. I didn't realize Senator Heinrich was even more of an energy nerd than I am, going all the way back to childhood. That actually beats me. But I've been in the power sector for 21 years. The first half of that was on the natural gas side. I worked at Shell for a number of years, and I've been in renewables for about a decade now. I am personally deeply connected to New Mexico, and I get really enthusiastic. Really enthusiastic about what my company is doing in the state, because I've spent years in the state. My children grew up doing Christmas days on the Taos Pueblo with the ceremonial dances and just the incredible richness and beauty of that. The food is something that I dream about, and I literally can't get anywhere else in the entire world. So I'm an energy nerd, and I'm really passionate about New Mexico, and I'm so honored to represent Pattern here today. So Pattern is a utility scale renewable only company, and that in and of itself makes us unique. We're privately held, we're independent, we're not an extension of a utility, and we're an American company, and we only do renewables. And it's utility scale, not the roof type kind of stuff. And we are also the largest investor in clean energy in the entire history in the state of New Mexico. So far we've put in $1.5 billion into the state with the current projects that we have, Broadview and Grady. And that created about 700 plus jobs through construction and 30 permanent operations jobs, which are primarily in rural communities. And it's very important for us to work in partnership with our environmental stakeholders, with our community stakeholders, to make sure that what we are doing in the state is beneficial to all as we transform the energy economy in the state. We are now in the process of doubling that investment. So we've got the Western Spirit Wind, as Commissioner Garcia Richard referenced, and we're ramping that up this year to more than 1,000 jobs needed in this year alone to build over 450 individual turbines and 150 miles of transmission. And then we are also involved in the SunZia project on a longer timeline, which is more than 3 times the investment of Western Spirit. So our capital plan that we have in hand right now and that we're building our business around, in addition to where we have a global footprint in other places, is looking at putting $8 billion into New Mexico in the next handful of years. And you asked us to speak for just a moment on the future of wind in New Mexico. I'll keep the thoughts short here because I know we're going to go into a longer conversation. But I want to be emphatic about the fact that we are really just at the beginning in New Mexico. Even thinking about the numbers I just articulated, we've got in the state the right policies with one of the most aggressive clean energy policies in the country. We've got a governor's office that actively engages with and connects stakeholders, is a big advocate for getting things done. We've got a state lands office, not to blow smoke in the commissioner's direction, but a lot of people don't understand how important state lands office is in other states, and they've created a culture there of getting things done rather than just getting stuck in the bureaucracy. But as Commissioner referenced, we just signed an agreement, got an approval, and we've only got 2 more to go, so we're working really well there. And then you also highlighted RETA. It is unique. I've done energy business in a lot of states, and the Transmission Authority RETA is unlike anything I've ever seen that partners on addressing one of the greatest challenges to renewable growth, which is transmission. So when you have that foundation and that vision and the tools and the policies and the leadership behind it, you look across the West. In the past handful of years, we've seen aggressive climate or clean energy targets get set up in many of the states in the West that is now covering about 80% of the total population are under those aggressive targets. When you don't think about anything incremental, no new policy, no carbon pricing, no nothing, when you just model out the targets that are on the books now in the West, you're looking at a build out starting in the mid-20s of around 9 to 10 gigawatts a year for 15 years. And what that means is around $700 billion of investment. And to put that in context, total load in New Mexico right now is around 5 gigawatts, right? So you're looking at a 10x market that New Mexico is incredibly well positioned to access because of this leadership, because of RETA, because of state lands. I believe New Mexico and its world-class wind and solar resource is poised to capture a large portion of that $700 billion market and create economic drivers in the state that extend beyond clean energy, that get into data centers and manufacturing. And one of the most important enablers of that, which we'll get into later to discuss, is breaking down some of the more parochial histories of how we manage the grid in the West and bringing a larger footprint, bringing a larger integrated grid into the West so we can make that market happen, and New Mexico can access it by being a net energy exporter while meeting its own needs as well.
Thank you, Sarah. That's some really good data. Ricky, would you mind introducing yourself?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. My name is Ricky Seguin. I work as the Executive Director of the Interwest Energy Alliance. Interwest is the regional trade association for the nation's leading developers of utility scale renewable energy resources. Companies like Pattern we're proud to have them as members of our organization. We're headquartered right here in Albuquerque, and we work to create market opportunities for utility scale renewable energy projects here in the state of New Mexico, as well as 5 other states across the interior West. And as a person who is proud to call New Mexico home and has loved this state for about as long as I can remember, I'm overwhelmed with how lucky I feel with the wind potential that New Mexico has. We have always had and continue to be proud of being home to some of the most competitive wind resources in the entire West. The way our antiquated transmission grid is set up is that the power lines come here and the electricity ships west, and New Mexico gets to be right on the edge of the windiest part of this country. So when it comes to opportunities to build wind projects and export that power to some of the largest electricity markets in the entire country along the West Coast, New Mexico has truly an unparalleled competitive advantage. You pair that with the leadership that we have from many of the folks on the call here today, as well as the governor and the legislature and the policies that they've put into the books already. And New Mexico stands only to gain from the build out of renewables and from wind right here in the state. I think this conversation couldn't be any more timely either, with the huge budget impacts that we're facing here in New Mexico, but we're seeing globally and of course around the nation. As we're thinking about how New Mexicans and New Mexico businesses recover from this economic crisis, one of the things that we are all using is electricity, and ensuring that New Mexicans and our businesses have access to stable, low-cost, competitive power, especially renewable power that is built here in state. That's a key economic recovery tool. So we certainly have a ways to go with tapping into that wind resource that Sarah mentioned that's just sitting latent here in the state. Thoughtful transmission planning, working with organizations like RETA, thinking holistically across the region with regional electricity markets. How can New Mexico sell into other states? These are all the big questions, but we have all the building blocks in place to step up and really lead, get projects built here in New Mexico, bring the jobs, bring the tax base here home into our state, and become a leader all across the West Coast and across the West. So thank you, really happy to be part of the conversation today.
Thank you, Ricky. Fernando, you're up next.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's a pleasure and honor to participate in this panel. Like the Senator Heinrich, I go way back in natural resources. I grew up in a mining family north of Taos. Father probably was the longest serving employee up there. I worked at that mine myself. In high school, I got interested in impacts of that mine to the Red River. Done science fair projects on that aluminum hydroxide precipitation happening there, causing a cementing effect on that stream bottom. Went to the New Mexico New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, where I went into the environmental sciences there. And, you know, the path that I followed after that, you know, I've spent the last 26 plus years in energy, water, and mining programs. And so I've had opportunities to be the chief of drinking water, the head of the Hard Rock program, the Mine and Minerals Division Director. But back in 2006, I had a wonderful opportunity to be the Energy Conservation and Management Division Director. And so I was here when a lot of these policies first came into place in New Mexico. The RPS came in around that time. RETA came into being in 2007. Which is where I'm working now. So, you know, I've kind of come back full circle. So I spent several years doing that, working in sustainable buildings, the renewable energy production tax credit, the solar market development tax credit, and advanced energy manufacturers tax credit, all sorts of policies. So I've been involved with it. I was very fortunate to have this opportunity to come back and work on renewable energy. And it seems like the stars have just aligned. Especially now with what's happening with COVID-19, as far as I can tell, the renewable energy industry is the only one willing to invest billions of dollars right now in New Mexico, and they're doing it. I'm really happy to say with our partners there at Pattern that the Western Spirit Project, which is a 155-mile transmission line that's going to deliver 800 megawatts of renewable energy along that line, is going to commence construction this fall. We expect the northern segment of that line to go into operation in May of 2021, and the entire line will be in commercial operation by mid-November of 2021. So that is a very unique public-private partnership that we have an opportunity to be part of that, where RETA owns the line. At the end of it, PNM is going to acquire this line, and it'll be part of the PNM grid. It's a wonderful opportunity. We do thank, you know, the State Land Office Commissioner for working with us, because when you look at the total developable land for viable wind, there's about 20,500 square miles of that, and about 18,500 square miles are on state trust and private lands. When you look at solar technical potential, there's 68,000 square miles that are there, and 49,000 square miles are on state trust and private land. So this is just a tremendous opportunity for New Mexico to take advantage of this time. We're really well positioned to deliver low cost energy, and with the Energy Transition Act that has now gone into effect, that the legislature and the governor put into place, there's going to be a lot of in-state demand, as well as if you look at surrounding states, there's a lot of energy policies in place there that just really create a perfect environment to really take this renewable energy we have in this state and deliver it for our in-state needs as well as out-of-state needs. So I'm just really pleased that we can get here. Right now, when we're looking at the total renewable capacity in New Mexico, and we just commissioned a study through ICF Resources out of Virginia that was looking at renewable energy potential transmission and energy storage projects over the next 12 years. And this study is going to be released and rolled out now in July. And it's going to have a lot of good information. It's going to tell us where we'll be at when we need to meet the milestones for the Energy Transition Act. But right now, we're in great shape. We have approximately 2,500 megawatts of solar and wind installed in New Mexico. We have another 3,100 megawatts that is currently under development. And there's several thousand megawatts more that we can do by the year 2032. This is going to create thousands of jobs, billions of dollars in additional investment. We're going to have some great benefits from the transmission, from improved reliability that can help reduce things like high costs of outages. We'll have a more efficient use of the generation resources. So this optimal use of existing grid resources, lowering the total generation required to serve the electric demand, that's really important. We're going to have more efficient grid operations as well. That's going to reduce bottlenecks and congestion on the system, allowing for more efficient dispatch of resources, including low-cost sources. So we're looking at the environmental benefits, the economic benefits, and I think we're just well positioned here to make an enormous difference. And really the only barrier to more renewables is transmission capacity. Right now we're operating at near or at transmission capacity. So transmission is going to play a real key role in this. I'm happy to say with the success of the Western Spirit project, we're getting more and more world-class renewable energy developers interested in partnering with RETA and investing in New Mexico.
Thank you very much, Fernando. John, last but not least.
All right, happy to follow all those introductions. Hey everyone, John Hensley. I'm head, number cruncher for AWEA, which is the American Wind Energy Association. We're the national trade association for the U.S. wind industry. And I'm pretty thrilled that everybody's throwing out a bunch of different numbers and kind of nerding out on the data. Sadly, I can't claim any roots to New Mexico, but I am a fellow Westerner. I originally hail from Wyoming, and I think as we think about renewables, while I'd like to promote Wyoming and sort of claim a competitive advantage, I think the state would do well to follow in the footsteps of New Mexico in terms of enabling policies that can help renewables move forward. I think you guys have done an excellent job in focusing on the infrastructure and the transmission, getting the right policies in place to help the industry move forward, and really take advantage of the enormous investment opportunity, economic development, and job creation opportunities that are available. I want to spend just a minute or two laying a bit of groundwork here and talk about the tremendous momentum that the industry has built and the opportunity that's really outstretched before us across the nation and in New Mexico. We had a remarkable milestone that was achieved in 2019 as the total amount of wind energy installed across the country surpassed 100 gigawatts. To give you some perspective, that's enough wind power to power more than 32 million American homes across the country. So a pretty substantial milestone to be hit. I think more impressively, the strong growth that we've experienced over the past decade has resulted in wind turbines being the single largest source of renewable electricity in the country. So more renewable energy is coming from wind turbines, including those in New Mexico, than any other source, providing right around 7% of the nation's electricity. And with it, states like New Mexico are recognizing the value both in clean energy as well as the supporting economic development and job creation benefits that come with wind projects. Last year alone, the wind industry invested $14 billion in new wind projects. They delivered more than $1.6 billion in state and local tax payments, as well as land lease payments to local landowners. We're an industry that supports more than 120,000 jobs across the country, including more than 2,000 jobs right there in New Mexico. And on the clean energy front, every year we help to avoid more than 200 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And in many ways, it really does feel like we're just at the very beginning of this journey, especially in states like New Mexico. The state was the fastest growing installer of wind energy in 2017. And today, as many have mentioned, there are right around 2,400 megawatts of projects that are in the near-term pipeline, which is more than enough to double the state's current capacity of wind. And those projects will bring with them hundreds of jobs, $1 billion of investment, and millions of dollars in payments to local governments and landowners. And it really doesn't have to stop there. We've heard about the tremendous potential that the state has. Wind and other renewables are actually proving resilient in the COVID-19 pandemic era and continue to be seen as great investments. So as the economy begins to recover and the clean energy transition continues, New Mexico really can look to the wind industry as a foundation of continued progress, and one that will happen even quicker with smart investments in transmission and ultimately the creation of a Western RTO that can really strengthen the connections of New Mexico's world-class wind and solar resources to electricity customers throughout the West who are really demanding more of this clean energy. So I look forward to this conversation and really applaud New Mexico on the progress that you've already made, and look forward to seeing more progress in the future.
Thank you, John. We already have some really good questions from the press piling up, but I want to get to a few of the more broad questions. And I'd like to start with our elected officials, Senator and Commissioner. We've heard that we are on a good path forward. We have made progress in developing renewables in our state. How can the federal and state government work together to help New Mexico become a leader in clean energy?
I think those partnerships are absolutely critical. The fact that in New Mexico right now, we have an alignment of a state land commissioner working with a governor and a legislature that are setting aggressive state-based policies, working together with a delegation in Washington that is pushing the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee and pushing for better nationwide policies. We have a team in New Mexico right now, and that's what it takes to outcompete other states who would like to see that generation created in their boundaries. I think the perspective of the folks who are actually generating these projects right now would be really helpful in that sense, because I think that what we bring to the table right now is world-class renewable resources, but also the problem solvers that are willing to get into the weeds and work through the details that really do matter to try to do something big, like a interstate transmission project or a generation project that is of the scale where we're now talking about gigawatts. Gigawatts used to be reserved for things like nuclear power plants, and now we're producing gigawatts with wind in central New Mexico. And so I think that's the key to maximizing our economic and job impact.
Thank you. Commissioner, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to play off of this idea of having a team, because I think that political will is probably the #1 issue that stands in the way of progress. Do we have folks who are at decision-making roles that are wanting to support and further our renewable energy journey? So our resource in New Mexico has been called unparalleled. John just called it world-class. So we don't have an issue with the resource. Both solar and wind, the resource is the best that it could be. What we really, I think, sometimes we get in our own way, and as regulators, we sort of become bastions of red tape rather than like thoughtful partners and supporters. And so I think that's number one. Number two truly is this question about transmission. I mean, you could have an entire panel on transmission alone. And folks don't like to talk about that because that means power lines, it means build out in their backyards. And we have a lot of very precious resources here in New Mexico that we don't want to be trampled and spoiled. And so we have to be thoughtful about where that build out occurs. That's why I'm very happy that Pattern has taken on this mantle of the SunZia project. I mean, this is a decade in the making because of this very reason. We don't have an ideal route for it. So I know that with Pattern's innovation, we will be sure to get that done. And then sort of the final thing I wanted to say is that we can provide incentive. So here at the Land Office, the way that those incentives take place is with balanced lease terms, fair lease terms, business-friendly lease terms. So we have the interest of the trust on one hand, and we have the interest of the developer and the industry on the other, and those have to be balanced so that we are not sort of pricing these folks out of a project. We want build out on state trust land to be desirable for industry. And so that balance, we have a lot of mechanisms at our disposal in our leases to be able to, take care of the trust, but provide incentives to the developers. So I think those are some ways that we can, at least from a state's perspective, really make sure we're moving forward on these initiatives. But I absolutely agree with the senator. It's a partnership, and we couldn't do the good work we do here in New Mexico if we didn't have federal partners like Senator Heinrich. So that's crucial.
Thank you. So you did bring up transmission issues, and I'd like to turn now to a question for Fernando, Ricky, and Sarah. What are the biggest barriers that exist in New Mexico to developing renewables? What can we do to streamline the regulatory process?
I can take the first stab at that question. That's a big, complicated question. And when it comes to the barriers with transmission, again, the commissioner talked about a lot of the issues with siting. That is always a huge one when it comes to transmission. How you site this, the partnerships that are formed, as the senator mentioned, are crucial in this area where you're getting the political leaders, the local governments, the community leaders, the developers, and everyone talking about how best to site the projects. Those are tremendous challenges because we do have such a lot of wonderful, beautiful land in New Mexico that we need to preserve and take into account a variety of factors when we're siting these transmission projects. So that's one key thing, but the other thing is we have a lot of great incentives and we got a lot of great policies in this state and in surrounding states. But one thing, I'd like to be able to educate folks on, and especially the political leaders, is that we don't want to also create any upfront barriers to being able to do these projects and put things in place that would put it at a competitive disadvantage. Because right now New Mexico has a competitive advantage to deliver low-cost renewable energy for in-state use and out-of-state demand as well. But a lot of times people want to say, well, but if you want to contribute in a meaningful way, you're going to have to start doing this or that, and before you know it, we have a whole lot of upfront barriers that are going to adversely affect our ability to put in more transmission capacity. And it's just convincing people that transmission is an important infrastructure and investment as a school or a hospital or a road or anything like that, because reliable electricity is so crucial to the economy. It's so crucial to homeowners, business owners, industry. It's something that people don't think about, but a reliable electric grid is super important. The more interconnections we have, the more reliable system we have, the more protection we have from outages, less congestion we have on these lines, the greater ability we have to deliver more wind and solar, which are intermittent sources across the grid. So that's going to be a real important solution in terms of getting more renewable energy out there.
Thank you very much. Sarah, did you want to tackle the next leg of it? And I think we have you muted. There we go.
There we go. Yes, so to build on what Fernanda said, agree with everything that's been said. And I have two supplemental thoughts. One is we've got the tools in the toolkit, right? We went through it, the legislative policies, the support of governor's office, a congressional delegation that's just leading the charge on the national level, a RITO and Alliance State Lands Office. That's unbelievable alignment. It is a clear vision and statement of leadership on the part of New Mexico. And one of the only other states I've seen do that was, believe it or not, Iowa. They made a decision in 1984 to put in their very first wind incentives, and they've stuck with it. And now there are days where over 50% of their power is generated by wind, and the economic investment is almost unparalleled. And the reason I bring that up as an analog is because we on the private side are deploying billions and billions of dollars of capital, and we have a massive global supply chain. We have a vision of trying to bring some of that supply chain over time into New Mexico. You know, if you build the demand, the supply will come over time. So these policies often get politicized, and what we need to try to do is keep telling the story that this is not a political issue. This is economic development. It lifts the entire state, and we need to keep these policies, keep this vision intact. So it's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and we can continue building upon that. And the other dimension I think that's very important in terms of realizing this vision for New Mexico is to look outward. I know New Mexico is technically a small state. We've got 2 million people in it, but it really punches above its weight in terms of leadership in the West. And I mean, just look at what New Mexico has done on the policy front with the clean energy targets. And right now, one of the biggest barriers to being able to build out in New Mexico is not necessarily going to be in the state itself. It's going to be, as John and others have said, and Fernando, this very balkanized grid in the West. We've got 38 balancing authorities. And so if you think of electricity going from here to here, and then it has to get balanced, and from here to here, and it has to get balanced. And if you break all that down and you create one interconnected grid, the electrons can move all over the grid to meet whatever needs at whatever time are necessary. Solar has a different profile than wind. When you put them together on an expanded grid, you put in storage, you have a little bit of natural gas reflexing, you can run a fully renewable, or let's call it 80%, 90% renewable grid in a very reliable way. But there's going to be some political will and leadership that is needed for people to take on, as Fernanda said, that very technical and often wonky conversation and reform the way that we manage the flow of energy around the West. And if we can do that, that is the key to unlocking that $700 billion market that we talked about at the beginning of this discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. Ricky, what would you like to add?
Well, first, let me say I couldn't be more aligned with everything that I've heard so far. And I think that goes to what we've already heard, which is New Mexico has this amazing leadership, both at the federal level in the governor's office, at the state lands office, but also this coalition of private investors and advocates who are committed to getting this done. So the optimism is there, the building blocks are in place. Unfortunately, we are now in that point where it gets pretty technical and pretty wonky, and it doesn't have to be. The benefits of regional coordination in the electricity sector are immense for the state of New Mexico. And what they mean are people at work. What they mean is tax dollars going to our schools. They're very tangible benefits that we will experience here in New Mexico once we first navigate what will be a technical process to ensure that we can buy and sell power in a real-time basis across state lines and pair the windiest nighttime wind power in New Mexico with the sunniest days in California. That really will be key, and being open to the concept of exporting and buying and selling power across state lines. We need to get comfortable with that to really feel these direct, tangible benefits in state. The acronym was brought up, but just to say it very clearly, John mentioned this, an RTO, a regional transmission organization, or an ISO, sorry to do two acronyms at once, but an independent system operator. We need an independent entity whose job it is to, in a non-discriminatory way, be dispatching power across state lines in a way that is efficient and affordable for the end use customers. That's key to bringing more renewables online generally. But again, going back to that competitive advantage, that is the answer for allowing New Mexico to unlock its competitive potential and bring gigawatts of renewables online here in the state. So we're all moving in the same direction, but now we're at that key point where we actually have to make it happen. And it's going to take all that leadership that's already there, focusing in on this relatively wonky topic.
Thank you, Ricky. We have a couple of really critical questions from Adrian Hedden. Adrian's from the Carlsbad Current Argus. Amid New Mexico's transition to renewable energy, how will communities in fossil fuel producing regions like Southeast New Mexico in the Permian Basin or Northwest New Mexico in the San Juan Basin be supported as they rely heavily on oil and gas revenue and jobs? Yes, Commissioner.
Sorry, I'm a school teacher. We raise our hands in school. So we joke with Adrian that he's slowly becoming the renewable energy reporter at the Current Argus, because he has written very recently a lot on renewable energy. So this question really hits the land office. Traditionally, historically, we've had a very heavy reliance on extractive industries to draw revenue into the state. And for the past 2 fiscal years, we've brought a record over $1 billion each year from that industry into the coffers of the state and to benefit the state budget and our beneficiaries. We know that is a boom and bust industry. We know that it's not a reliable source of energy. The funny thing is that the southeast part of the state is one of the most competitive areas for developers looking for new build out of renewable energy projects. Number one, because they have customers right there. The oil and gas operators themselves, believe it or not, a lot of them are wanting to go renewable for their power generation. And number two, we've got great resource down there. Not only is that, one of the best, oil and gas regions in the world, but the resource for wind and solar as well is rich in that area. So that has becoming a very competitive area for folks to seek out. In the northwest part of the state, we've got that transmission node where we've been talking a lot about distribution, the way that the transmission runs in the west. The northwest part of our state is a key player in energy that gets transmitted west of New Mexico. And so both of those areas, ironically, they were great for oil and gas. Now it turns out they also could be great potentially for renewable energy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ricky, would you like to add any comments?
Well, I will note, I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's something that we as advocates, as well as we as an industry, need to be thinking about, is what is our role in a changing electricity system and in a decarbonized economy. And I'll note that the Energy Transition Act, one of its strongest features that was replicated in states across the West was its focus on workforce and worker transition and dedicating focused resources to the communities most impacted by the shuttering of coal plants. So late breaking even today, the hearing examiners at the New Mexico PRC issued their recommended decision on the replacement resource package for PNM's early closure of the San Juan coal units. That replacement resource package had a very thoughtful focus on how renewables could be built not only in San Juan County, but in the consolidated school district to ensure that the community that would be experiencing an impact from the plant and mines closing would actually receive some of that benefit there. So it's a central part of the discussion as we think about bringing fossil generators offline and bringing renewable operators online.
Thank you, Ricky. And you brought up the ETA, so I do want to touch on that because that's such a big goal. So just to remind everyone on the call, the ETA, the Energy Transition Act, signed into law in 2019, requires that 50% of our state's electricity is generated from renewable source resources by 2030. This increases to 80% by 2040, and by 2045, all of our electric grid will be 100% carbon free. The Energy Information Administration, which is an independent data gathering agency, reported that in 2018, only 19% of our energy came from clean sources. So from that point on, we have 10 years to increase by 31% and 25 years to increase by 81%. What do we need to do to get to that hefty goal?
I would mention, Candace, that there was a recent study that came out that just didn't set a specific goal, but looked at how can we get a lot of clean energy on the grid and cheaply and do it as quickly as possible. And as they ran through their analysis, what they came up with was that 90% clean energy grid could actually be accomplished by 2035. And not only was it technically feasible, but it was actually cheaper. And those kinds of numbers were just unthinkable in the past, but we're not dealing with straight lines. We're dealing with curves in terms of cost declines and the advancement of these technologies, whether it's the cost of solar, whether it's the cost of wind, whether it's the cost of storage, that are just radically changing how quickly we can do this. So then it becomes a matter of how do we manage the individual projects to get it done? We're back to the same challenges that you heard about from Ricky, which is how do we make sure that we're just taking care of the nuts and bolts of actually doing these projects? Because the generation capacity is there, the economics are now there, and it becomes a matter of executing. I don't know if you know who Jigar Shah is, but he's a pretty well respected energy expert and in the venture capital world. And he likes to say, it's simple, it's not easy. And so the path forward is pretty straightforward. That doesn't make it easy. And that doesn't mean the cultural issues that we'll have to grapple with people and jobs being displaced and the areas where the new jobs are going to be are sometimes different. All of that is hard, but the technology is straightforward and the economics are straightforward.
Thank you very much.
Yes, this is John. I totally agree with the senator. I mean, just look at the numbers, that 19% that you cite, that's almost exclusively wind at this point. There are roughly 2 gigawatts in the ground, another 2.5 gigawatts that are on their way. So within the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to be close to that 40 or 50% mark. You know, the challenge is definitely not with the technology or the technical feasibility. It's with all these other challenges, the siting, the permitting, how you work with the local stakeholders, get the local communities involved, make sure that the jobs are cropping up in the right places. Those are the things that are going to be more of the challenge. And then I would also not lose sight of a potential further opportunity for the state in terms of actually building out way beyond those targets in order to meet the growing clean energy needs throughout the entire West, to supply states like California, Arizona, and others with additional clean energy, and also to recruit new business to the state. I mean, we saw in the case of Facebook that having the availability to work with PNM to sign a contract and deliver clean energy to their new data center was pretty instrumental in bringing them to the state. And you could see other deals like that happening where the availability and the ease of purchasing renewables can do a lot to drive new business activity in New Mexico.
Thank you very much, John.
And if I could just build on that a little bit, Candace, I think I agree with what the senator said and with what John said. I would say, as one of the companies doing this work, I would add A, political will. We need to keep just people aligned and focused. Let's not get distracted. And B, companies such as myself have to do a really good job of telling this story. And what I mean by that is I find people in the renewable energy industry often are good at talking to like-minded people or good at talking with the environmental community. They have not historically been as good at telling the story in a simpler, more broadly accepted way. I mean, there's just basic facts that we have to share, that it is the cheapest cost of power on the planet now, unsubsidized. Wind energy and utility scale solar are the cheapest forms of power now in almost every market in the planet. In the United States, according to President Trump's Bureau of Labor Statistics, the fastest growing job in the US economy is wind technician. The wind industry is hiring veterans at a rate that is 67% higher than the national average across the economy because their skill sets are so uniquely suited for what we do. As Fernando said, the investments we're making in rural communities, billions of dollars into rural revitalization, we're one of the only sectors in the country doing that at this juncture. So A, we have to tell the story, and B, we have to walk the talk. We have to make sure each community that we are partnering with is experiencing material benefits, and that is something Pattern is very committed to. For example, just our Broadview and Grady projects, through wages, royalty payments, land leases, taxes, is generating not the capital expenditure, but $60 million of benefit for the communities in those areas every single year. But people don't know this. We're partnering with Mesa Lands Community College for their wind technician training program. We hired almost their entire class, their 2017 graduating class. And we partnered with them on getting a grant so they can expand their footprint and create a new campus in central New Mexico. So we have to be good citizens, and we have to make sure everyone is benefiting, and we have to tell the story.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I just want to remind all the reporters who are on the call, this is a last call to type in your questions in the Q&A box. Adrian has another really good question. What specific regions of New Mexico show the highest potential for both wind and then separately for solar? And how will other regions benefit from what they have going on?
Well, I can jump in and happy to get started in answering this question. There is both the opportunity and the potential that comes with the resource itself. Where is it sunniest? Where is it cool? Where is it high altitude? Where's the wind blowing? But then there's also where is there potential based on where there is transmission with available capacity. And those two don't always match. And that's kind of why part of this conversation is happening, is to say, in some of the most rural parts of our state that could stand from the greatest opportunity from development, we need to make sure that the transmission is present to move those electrons to market. On the wind front, really it's eastern New Mexico that when you just look at the NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory maps of the states, that's where you see obviously the very windy Central Plains in the United States. We in New Mexico get a sliver of that on the eastern edge, and that is where we have the greatest opportunity just from a resource perspective, but then moving that power to customers in population centers here in the state, as well as to markets west of us. That's really the challenge, and where we rely on folks like Fernando and his team to help actually build out those resources.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to weigh in on the specific areas of New Mexico that could benefit?
Candace, I think the good news on the solar side is it's everywhere. I mean, we're just ubiquitously, I've had solar on my roof in Albuquerque since, 2004. And the economics are so much better now than they were then. So when it comes to utility scale solar, it once again goes back to that issue of transmission. How do you plug in, make the right interconnects to existing transmission or create new transmission? And with distributed solar, it's really anywhere in the state. It makes sense everywhere in New Mexico.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to weigh in on this one?
I think the eastern side, and I think that's what Ricky was referring to on the maps, the eastern side is just phenomenal wind. Unfortunately, like I said, the distribution nodes are on the western side, and we've got a river running through the middle of the state. So those are some challenges that we have to encounter, certainly.
And we're working on it. We're working on that one with y'all. Yay. And I'll just brag on New Mexico for a moment. People have often referred to Texas as the Saudi Arabia of wind. And when you look at eastern New Mexico, that wind there is good as anything you're ever going to see in Texas. It is just amazing. And the senator's right. We've got the wind resource and the solar, and they are truly exceptional. And that drives the economics and the costs way down as well.
Yeah, I talked to a solar developer actually just in the course of doing business, and they talked about how you actually need, in New Mexico, because of the quality of the resource, a smaller area of solar to produce the same amount of energy that you would need from a larger area in other places, just because of the quality. You know, our elevation and clean air add to the quality of the resource, just so y'all know. It's not just, you know, across the board. We have many things that, and I would be remiss if I did not talk about, another developer talked about our time of day advantage, that it gets windy in New Mexico right as the sun is going down in Markets West. So that's a great thing for us here as well.
That's right.
Thank you, everyone. Did we have a final comment on this last question? I thought I might have cut someone off. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to offer the senator and the commissioner the closing comments, if there's anything that you would like to end the conversation with.
I would just say there are lots of challenges that are going to be out of our control. What's in our control is our ability to really fully lean in and make a difference and outcompete other places for these jobs and for this clean energy development. We should be a state that is exporting clean electrons and importing dollars and importing jobs all the time. And we have the right team and the right resources to do it. And we need the commitment to get through those challenges that you've heard about from some of our partners.
Thank you. Commissioner, any parting words?
I'm just so, you know, grateful to be part of this team. And just remember that when you use state trust land to do build out of renewable energy, the beneficiaries of the state benefit from that as well. We figure that using the state trust land that we've identified that's available will result in 5,000 additional megawatts. So we are here, we are ready, we want to be part of the conversation. And Sarah, we will take your supply line production in New Mexico. You heard it here first.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the organizers of this and reporters on the call. If we did not answer your question, I'm sure the panelists are committed to doing that. You are welcome to email them to me and I will connect you. I'm at cbeeke@bizjournals.com. So please feel free to send them to me and I will connect you with the appropriate panelists. Thank you, everyone. A round of digital applause for your excellent, oh yes, the cool jazz hands, of course. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful
Thanks,
session,
everyone.
y'all.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.